So I'm Simon Gibbon, I'm an ex-industrial chemist with ICI, and I now know more about the River Tees and how the marine system works than I ever thought I would, but I'm still pretty much an amateur, so there may all be things in here you can correct, but I can tell you the story of what's going on. So firstly, on that basis, I just want to do some quick acknowledgements for the quite a lot of people who've been involved in this. I mean, since the crab dive happened in 2021, which I'll sort of describe a bit more about later on. A lot of people have got together to try and understand what's going on locally. So the North East Marine Research Group I'm particularly involved in, where academics jumped in quite quickly trying to do things to help. And really understanding the current state of things isn't a research job, it's measurements, it should be done as part of just keeping the system going, it's regulation, not research. North East Fishing Collecting, we've got Stan Rennie from Hartlepool here, who's one of the fishermen who's been keenly involved in what happened after the crab dive, trying to get support for fishermen, putting everything together. Impressed with the local councils. I mean, even our own North Yorkshire Council got involved with the teal-type ones in trying to understand and support people for what had happened. Sadly, they didn't get as much response from government or from agencies as one might have hoped they would. If you devolve power down, then these people like the Environment Agency, the Marine Management Organisation, and so on, Natural England should respond and be responsible to the people who've now got the nominal responsibility. They haven't got the power, they can't do it. Okay, that's sort of a bit quickly. So what I'm going to do is take you through the crab dive relatively rapidly. I don't know, I mean, hopefully you're all fairly well aware of that, but it wasn't a one-off event, it's a thing that has been going on, it's possibly still going on. The Harbour Seal Pups is a story that, once again, has been going on, but it's told in different lights from different sides. And that's where we find a lot of this, is that it's all too easy to take an optimistic view of things and not look into it. And we can't do that because we haven't got data behind it, and if we just assume things are all right, and they're actually not, then they're going to get worse. And that's a lot of what this work we've had to do has been about. And then I'm going to put in the context of River Tees. It's slightly back to front of this, but I think it's worthwhile going through why, what nature-wise we're interested in, to then go through the River Tees and how that's quite a complex system, and then go into contamination, dredging, and some conclusions, which are sort of processes that are happening behind the scenes. So where are we talking about? The River Tees, Redcar, Hartlepool. The point of this slide is just to say that all these areas actually are very important for wildlife. I mean, everything in light green is a special protection area where birds are protected under UK law. So, you'd hope that everything's been done possible to help us. And then internationally, back in 1971, the Ramsar Convention, this was specified as being an area of international importance for wetland. And that's why we see these birds come through and everything else. But underneath the water, we've also got species that this is very important for. And equally, if you just listen from the birds, and the birds aren't going to do well unless you've got something to eat. So keeping this environment clean has been very important. That was the sort of nature side. Industrially, this is a major port. If you ever sit at the end of South Gare, they've sized the ships coming in, tankers with gas, tankers with chemicals, container ships. There is a huge, and that needs this river to work. So this area here is managed by the Staffordshire Harbour Authority, which is now PD Ports, and they dredge it on a regular basis. That little green dot is their dredger plant there, and the red dot's another dredger plant there. And all year round they are occasionally, they're coming out several times a week and doing dredging campaigns. And that material they picked up the river gets dumped over here. It's about 3 miles offshore by the shortest route, and that's where things get dumped. Now, if this was a clean river, that would be clean material, but if you sort of notice, this has got quite a lot of industry along the sides of it, and so that the river isn't clean, at least what's in the bottom of it, and potentially there's industry going on currently. Plus, we all know about sewage outflows and the amount of sewage we're releasing, so there's a nutrient-rich issue there as well. Okay, so the crab dive from 2021. Basically, overnight, is that reasonable to say crab?
Crab lobsters, everything.
Everything just was washing up the beaches. This was not, right the way down the coast you could find this. It's not normal. Die-offs do happen, but they don't normally happen instantly almost. they happen over time. There's a few crabs there one day, or there's a few dead animals there one day. The storm comes up, there's a few more. On this occasion, things came in massive numbers. Then I think about the 4th of November, you noticed the kelp dying in Hartlepool, didn't you? So that was, kelp should be there, seaweed fronds flashing around, they all just scoured off. Once again, this does happen. There are really severe storms, but this didn't correspond with incredibly severe storms. So something happened. Since then, there have been a lot of die-offs, and if you go on a website I'll point you to later, we have reports collected together by Stan and by his daughter of things dying off all the way down the coast, whether it was starfish in Staves or cockles in Whitby and so on. These die-offs happened, and if it's possible, if you haven't seen this one up here, you wouldn't be connecting them together. But there are things wrong there that just aren't right. Now, a lot of these were reported to the Environment Agency. Their fallback position is it's a natural event, And then if there's any storm, they can relate it to that. And then, to be fair to them, they could well be right. Once we killed off the crabs, you've made this ecosystem very unbalanced. So other things come in to fill the gaps. And once they've eaten the dead crabs or whatever they're eating, then there's nothing for them to eat. So it may not be unusual for things like starfish to die off, but it does start to say, hang on a second, one thing okay, but lots of them start to get So, really, 2070 up to last year, we drastically decreased inshore catches of crabs. Do you know crabs? And you're finding some small crabs now, Stan, just...
There's, it seems to be a process. We get our spawn from the farms further north, and it seems to be a process, an ongoing cycle where creatures try to make a comeback, they start growing, and then we just have a die-off, and it's just been like that since 21. The last month or so, nobody's seen anything like it, but there's been a run of crabs, which were all white, very clean crabs down from the wash up to Northumberland, and they seem to be travelling north. So we had a run of crabs for about 3 or 4 weeks, and just hope at some stage the ecosystem is just shot. It's not recovered.
So if it was any good, they'd get bigger, and next year you'd see bigger ones. So yeah, we just have to hope, don't we? But the worry is that if we're not looking into this, as we're not now, and there was a report concluded in early 2023 said, right, we've looked into as much as we can. There is a cause, we've found it, and so we're not going to look anymore. It's very complacent in that way. So what happened in 2021? Right the way from above Hartlepool, right the way down to Whitby and Scarborough Way, there were reports of crabs having died, and as Stan was saying, the crabs are born, so to speak, as larvae up here. There's a literal current that carries them down the coast, and they basically stop off and then live and grow bigger as crabs and become proper benthic species living in the bottom of the water. The migratory lobsters were unaffected, and that sort of makes sense. They migrate in and out of this zone, but equally they may not have been susceptible. That some things are poisonous to some creatures, or some things are toxic, or they can catch it, and other things can't. We don't know well, but it was a real. It has largely killed the fishing industry. Is this Hartlepool still a fishing port?
Well, not for very long. The once great fleet we had before September 21. There's 7 prawn trawlers left. 5 of them are for sale. The prawns, we warned them that the prawns would die off. It took a bit longer for the prawns. Now they've got the sting towards just reaching about the time before they even throw a net to catch a prawn. So, well over half the hour, the bottom fleet's got to go. A lot of jobs, a lot of lifelong friends, because we're all from the same age group, and I'm ready for our heritage and ready for the future, because it doesn't look like we're going to be designated as a fishing port very short.
So it has real human, apart from the environment, it has real human effects. It really is pretty devastating, but equally it's pretty invisible if you're not part of that industry. If you're not involved, you don't necessarily see it. So, basically there are a whole load of theories. If I'd been standing here in the end of 2021, the Environment Agency would have been telling me that there's an algal bloom, which, is possible, but isn't unlikely. We don't see a lot around here. It was the wrong time of year, September, October, the water's getting too cold. There is a lot of nutrient enrichment though, so that wouldn't have helped. However, that's ruled out. At the same time, they basically reported that it's pyridine in crabs. Now, at that stage, we didn't know whether pyridine was toxic or not. So one of the scientists involved in this North East Marine Research Group basically looked at the effect of pyridine on crabs. And sure enough, it was toxic to them. It's not the most toxic material, but it certainly was toxic. So that was the theory we're running with then. However, in 2024, DEFRA, so the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, developed a new pyridine test that showed actually there was no pyridine in the crabs. So it's a bit like, who knows whether the test was, we didn't have the test at the time, had the samples got old, tricky to say. Anyway, at that stage there was a lot of local and even national uproar about this. So there was an independent panel pulled together by the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And they basically came out a report early 2023, and they said it was a novel pathogen. What they said is basically it's as likely as not. We can't find the pathogen, but no other causes explains it, and they ruled out all the other causes for various different reasons. One of I think where I am now, and where I think we are as a group, is that it's probably multiple causes, and we'll see that with the seals a bit in a second. It's likely that there is contamination in there. That was probably a large part of it, and the fact it corresponds to a major change in the way in which the river was being dredged leads to that conclusion as well.
Do you mind if I put a couple of points on that?
Certainly, yeah, go for it.
We set up the North East Fishing Collective, and Joe Redfern got on board some scientists from local universities, and Simon was absolutely masterful at investigating these. So at the time, we had enough evidence to prove that it wasn't an algal bloom. So rather than blame the algal bloom, the scientists proved it wasn't. So we were going to take them for a judicial review. We had a meeting, we decided to put we had just given the page, we raised enough money for some legal advice. We decided to put the judicial review in my name only, because then the most we could pay would be £5,000 from me. The foolish thing what happened was Joe told all the agencies that we would be publicising it in a week. So they quickly got together, this new group, and before that week was up to come up with another false theory of another pathogen. So we wasted all our money what had been raised on legal fees for the prejudicial review. It blows out the water by changing the course. We're just being up against it all the time.
It is disappointing that there is a degree of carpet, but in turning up to a meeting where we were going to discuss this pyridine, and no mention that it was a new test, only to be told, we developed a new test and there isn't any pyridine. You don't normally do that. We give people a bit of advance warning so they can anyway. It's been a bit that way. So seals, different story. If you go to Griffin Creek here, you can basically look and see the seals that are on seal sands. See seal sands for a reason. The seals pull out onto here. They have done for centuries. There was a period in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s when they weren't pulling out there, but they are pulling out now. And there is a breeding colony of harbour seals. The Tees is the only breeding colony between a huge colony down at the Wash and another colony up at the Forth, up there. So any seals in this area are likely to have been born on the Tees, or at least they're ones that have travelled up here and stayed. Any pups aren't going to travel all the way between these two different places, and that will be relevant in a second. Seal sand's great. You can see the industry here. Here we have the seals pulled out just on the edge there. Aerial photograph of the seals there. What I just wanted to highlight here, I'm not too sure how readable that is from where you are, but basically This is where these signs are. You can drive along this road, you can leave Salttown from the RSPB place, turn left. There is a place where there is a viewing spot for seeing the seals. They pull up underneath the creek here. And there's two boards. One says back in the 1980s, we started to have seals coming back. In the 60s, there was the odd seal seen. By the 80s, there were seals pulled out in reasonable numbers, and you can see them. It then says, basically, after that, we've now got a healthy breeding colony. And yes, seals do breed. What you're going to see here is I'm not quite sure that's healthy breeding. The breeding is okay, but survival after that isn't. And it's this sort of, the optimistic message is great. Picture of a seal, fantastic. Good news story, they're now breeding after what happened. And it is good, it's better than it was. But there's a difference between, incredibly bad, vaguely okay, and actually good. And we're in danger of stopping them just about, okay. So the sad story from this is that basically seals are born late June, early July. They're born slightly earlier further down the country because it's warmer, basically. And between 89 and 97, there were only 12 pups born, and 7 of those stranded. So what a pup does is if it can't, it's not enough energy, it's not enough food, it's not well, it will pull itself onto a beach and sit there. And that's why it's very important to keep dogs away from them. Now they can be just temporarily out of energy and they can go back and swim. But these ones are ones that were stranded and they had to be taken off the beach. Sadly, what happens normally is that they are too ill by that stage, so they are put to something euthanized. And unfortunately, certainly back in those days, there weren't enough seal rehabilitation places. They'd already been taken by seals down in the south who were ill earlier because they were born a bit earlier. So they'd taken the rehabilitation spaces. So even if these ones could be recovered, they often had to be put to sea. The story then up until 21 was very much as Gordon said. Good news story, the seals are coming, the pups have been born, it's all okay. Back in 2021, people actually, and possibly this was triggered by what happened with the crabs. Hang on a second, the crabs have just died. Didn't we see an awful lot of seals along the coast this year? And people put 2 and 2 together and said, look, these can only be local seals. We only know that 10 were born, and we've had 10 pulled up and dried stranded. In 2022, we had 22 was the maximum number of pups for harbour seals that we counted. The next breeding colony is over 100 miles away in either direction. And actually there were 23 harbour seals stranded between Northumberland and North Yorkshire. So, we may have missed one being born, or else possibly one seal, but the majority of these seals are likely to come from teas. And those were seals that were taken and they were looked at and they couldn't be dealt with, so most of those would have been euthanized. In 2024 there were 23 stranded pups. 16 had mouth rot, and this is the condition here where the hard palate inside their mouth, the edge of their mouths. It's a bacteria that's around all the time, but a bit like us in cold sores. You're fine until you have a bad day, and you're a bit immunosuppressed, and this thing then goes after you. So these seals, it's not going to help them eating. So whether they're eating well beforehand is another matter. But they basically then can't survive. And it's an opportunistic bacteria. They have that inside their mouth, but they have a whole range of bacteria. If you look at these 23 different seals, they didn't have an identical set of bacteria inside their mouths. So it doesn't look like it's a disease, or it doesn't look like it's a new thing that's doing it for them. It looks like it's probably just the opportunistic thing there. You've got the most of this one in your mouth, that's what kills you. The other thing is that what we found in the book, but around the world, so the Walden Sea, Puget Sound over in North America, where there's been industry in seals, they found high concentrations of PCBs, basically make seals very weak. And when all these seals, a number of these seals were taken, blubber samples were taken, and they find that they have high levels of PCBs. So this Tees Estuary Seal Survey conducted by Tara Seals Research, who are the people who basically did work back in the 90s as part of Tees Development Corporation, looking at the seals when they weren't doing very well, and they were dying when they were just before they were weaned. Did a study and they looked at these. They're finding they have not made PCBs again, and that's probably likely to be the cause. We can't prove it, but why have they got that? They shouldn't have made PCBs. And these are some of the industrial contaminants that they were nominally stopped being made in 87, they were banned around the world, but they're in products like transformers, they're in paint on ships, they're all around us. And you know, some are made now by mistake in processes, chemical processes going on. And what happens is, and I should have been on a slide of this, is biomagnification. So if you think about it, there's a little creature down at the bottom of the river or the sea, it eats up a bit of contamination, and then something eats it, something eats that, something eats that, a fish eats that, and then the seal eats the fish. And so each time these things get eaten, you're getting more and more. And the way seals are, they have a big fat layer. These are highly hydrophobic, lipophilic materials. They end up in the blubber of the seals and they concentrate it. What happens then is the mothers need fat when they're making milk, and they use their own blubber to make the fat they give to the seal pups. So the seal pups get a big dose of milk, lovely scrummy, but they get a big dose of PCB with it. Their smaller body weight, it's likely that, whereas the mothers could cope with this level of PCBs, the seal pups can't. So that's why they're fine. It's difficult, like all these things. We don't have enough data to say definitively, but you know, sort of PCBs in seals dying. No seals other parts of the world die with PCBs in them. Pretty likely that's involved. So if you look, there were 21 pups born in 25, and basically all along this coast here, you can see, you know, these are some of the ones that were actually taken, and there were blubber samples taken from them. You know, they are pretty local to us. It's unlikely these seals would have swum up from the wash as little pups. They're only, you know, 8 weeks old, so they haven't had time to get there. And sadly, you know, out of those 18 were euthanized. I don't know what happened to the other 3. I mean, it's possible they were rehabilitated, which is great. It really doesn't look very nice. I mean, you have these seals, you know, this one is in, you know, a very bad way. You can just see by its mouth. And even if you, sorry, I haven't said on there, if you look at this one, the profile just looks wrong. It obviously had something already wrong in its mouth. It looks relatively, you know, it looks quite a bulky pup, but it's not good. And you don't go, you know, these photos are taken at distance because you don't disturb them. So we don't go and pick up seals and say, look, they don't look very well. We leave them in peace. It's only when they strand and then you go and see them. The other thing now, the good news, the other side of this is there is actually another study going on, which is funded by DEFRA, so that's great. And it's the British Divers Marine Rescue Life Rescue. If you phone them up, they will come and rescue these seals, and they will try and take to rehabilitation, which is super. Sadly, you know, most of these seals are put to sleep. And then they take a mouth sample, great, but they purely do a DNA analysis. So they're looking for, they've decided, well, my words, it feels like they've decided there's a novel disease, we need to find the novel disease. There is no post-mortem done. So what we've been doing is we've been getting the seals after they looked at them, and we've been cutting samples out of them to do a blubber analysis to look for PCBs. And we're growing the bacteria in their mouth so we can actually see which bacteria are thriving. Because you may have a tiny bit of another bacteria, but it won't necessarily thrive with all the other things there. So this is a real shame. You know, this is great they're taking the seals in, great there's a chance to rehabilitate them. Sad that so few are being rehabilitated. So that's the sort of seal story so far. I'll come back to some, you know, what we hope to do about this to make it better next year. So move on a bit. The River Tees. You know, the Tees sits in the North Sea. The littoral currents we've been talking about down here, so little crabs are born in Lindisfarne or wherever, or Blythe. They're washed down as larvae down here, and they're, you know, basically settling down the coast when they feel a good time to do it. Equally, if we put chemicals out of here, or we put sediment out, or even some disease here, it's going to flow down this coast, because that's the majority of things are going in that sort of direction. Now, you know, with us, I've talked about disposing of the sediment. We only have a continental shelf near to us. If you're off the Nova Scotia or off the west coast of Canada, you have your little bit of continental shelf, and you have a huge great trench. So you can dump stuff down a dirty great trench and stay there forever. It's not going anywhere. When we dump stuff in the continental shelf, it's in all these currents. So, you know, if we take contaminated material, it's going to be flowing around in the system a bit. It may be okay, it may be diluted enough, but we can't, there's no way. for us locally. Whereas if you're a Canadian, you chuck it down the trench, you chuck some clean stuff on top, and it's gone. You won't have to worry about it in your life. Now, the other thing is the whole River Tees is fascinating. I mean, it was a fascinating river. Had all these bobbles and bends in it. This one here, for example, is very inconvenient for shipping. So back in the 1830s, that was taken out, and that's straightened out. The other thing here is, that doesn't look exactly how the river looks now. We had two channels with sealed sands, and those were moving. So as the different storms came in, this channel would have moved. Once again, that was pretty inconvenient for shipping. So that's all been changed. And if we just look at this end bit here, it should look like, well, not should, but if we hadn't got the industry there, if we hadn't got the shipping, it would look like the Dublin estuary over in Cumbria. So here you can see these sort of shifting sands, not very well defined channel. It'd be a real pain for shipping, possibly why that channel hasn't developed. But it would look far more like that. But what's happened here is that over time, we've reclaimed all these bits. And as we reclaim bits and we channelise, so for example here the river's been canalised. So it's been made into a canal by putting solid walls there. So that means there's no possibility for anything to shift. And Brown back in the 1800s, we were starting, 1900s, 1800s, we were starting to get rid of all these brown bits to industry. Then later on we took out the orange bits, then the slightly green bits. And now what we're left with is this is sealed sands. We've got brown sands here, North Gare, and we've got the coastal beach down there. Now I think this is a map that Inca produced in 2019. That bit has gone, as far as I can see. The dunes are built up, and there is no longer water coming in as an intertidal stream there. So that habitat for birds and for other things that want that intertidal space. Where the water comes up and down is amazingly biologically productive. Things live there, and so on. That's all gone. 90% is gone. We've straightened the river. We've put hard boundaries in, so there isn't a lot of space for nature. And we sort of know, well, this is how it looks now. We've got all the chemical industry down here, chemical industry up over here a bit. You've got all the steel as was here, T-sport here. Lots of industry going on. Back in the 60s, there's no question. Their sewer was this, the river. They were dumping stuff into here. Less so now, but Brown Sands, water treatment plant takes both commercial and domestic waste, and a lot of that then gets disposed of. They're about to run a 4-kilometre pipe so they can get rid of things a bit further away. There isn't any away, that's what I'm sort of saying here, so concerns about that. If you've got any time, it's a fascinating place to walk around. I mean, if you're a fisherman, you've probably done this anyway, an amateur fisherman as well as. But brown sand, there are lots going on here, there are lots of worm casks, and that's what the birds love. If you dig in, it's got some interesting colours in it, because what's been washed in and out of the river is all represented in that sediment. You can see salt marsh formation going on, which is a natural process. Here we've got North Gare. Just in the last 2 years, this has come up as now being called the salt marsh. If you go to Greetham Creek, then that's a more developed system where over time, and partly because of us, because we've put walls in here, we would have made this dry out long term. So that's made a salt marsh. And that's all creating some space for nature, which is about 90% gone. We need some of that. Good news, Greetham South, they're doing a managed realignment. So they're going to take out the flood wall that would be back of the sort of retaining wall here, and they're going to let the sea wash in and out. So over time, that will re-wet. In all honesty, they're doing it for flood resilience, because the industry that's there is threatened by flooding. But it will create space for nature, and there's a big project called Tees Tidelines, which if you search for that, there's some really nice films on it, and what's going to be there. Some pictures here of what it was like. They were dredging for Able Port here, and you've got seals sat here, and you have a huge great dredger here digging away. So they haven't got a very peaceful time with all their dredging. What you also see is here's a trailing suction hopper dredger, and you can't see rum colour here, but there's a lot of material left behind by the dredging. But once again, the seals are only swimming through. So if this isn't clean, which I'm going to sort of explain to you why it isn't in a second, then the seals are going to have a bit of a challenge there. Which brings us on to contamination. So too much information on here in a way, but I think if you think about a river, you have a river there, we've got industry along the side of it. You put an oil tank here, there's going to be spills. You have a chemical, you have an industry here, it's going to be discharging into that river. And all of that is going to end up in sediment down here. Somebody's going to be washing in and out, and so if you're in the river in the 660s, the cyanide concentration would not have done you any good. Now that cyanide is largely gone, but there are other chemicals that are in there, the heavier organics, heavy metals and things like this, catalyst residues and so on, which will still be in the sediment here. Now when you're dredging the river, you will potentially pick some of that up. There's one concept I need you to sort of understand, which is that basically if you take a sugar cube and you just measure the outside area of your sugar cube, so your big sugar cube here, and then you smash it into smaller and smaller pieces. As it gets smaller and smaller, the amount of material you've got, the volume is the same, but the surface area will drastically go up. So if you take a 10 centimetre thing and smash it up to 1 millimetre, you'll have 100 times the area. If you take it down to 1 micron, so a tenth of a human hair, you'll have 100,000 times the amount of area. Now, why is that important? Well, what happens is that things that are nasty and toxic, and all the organic chemicals, the polychlorinated biphenyls, for example, PCBs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, are all hydrophobic. They're like the oil in your vinegar, your oil and vinegar. They will be separated from water, they won't be involved in water. They will stick to the outside of these particles. So basically, if you see a big stone, it's probably not harmless, but the tiny little bits of fluffy stuff that have come up when you take sediment out of the bottom of the river and you shake it up, those floating bits are going to have most of the contamination. So if you're doing is measuring the weight of it, it's not the weight that counts, it's the area. And that's very important because that's what the dredgers will tend to be using. The small particles, in the case of dredging, they're lost when you dredge. If you drag a spade through the bottom of the seabed or through a riverbed, you'll see the stuff fluffing up. The same happens when you're trying to dredge. They're also lost from overflow from the dredger, and they'll stay suspended. You shake up a sediment sample, you end up with a little foamy, little hazy bit at the top, and there's other stones at the bottom. Those will stay suspended for a long time. In a river, that means they've been carried. So they'll be carried down the river and potentially spread whatever contamination is on their surface. And what we're doing is we're taking our contaminated sediment and dumping it out to sea. No, we're not. We're leaving an awful lot of contamination in the river because it's on these small particles which aren't going out to sea. The other thing that's happened is, how does that contamination get in there? Well, the big thing that happened in 2021, and it's still going on to some extent, was all the redevelopment of Tees Works here. So Tees Works, massive, all the steel works. We have a massive site here, 4,000 acres, or 4,000 hectares, I forget which now. It was covered with steelworks, coke ovens, metal recovery, landfills. So on the Redcar site here, you have the blast furnace. You once again had coke ovens there. You had coke ovens here on the south bank. Now we've got sea or wind there. And the important thing here is coke ovens. To make coke, you take coal, you heat up to very high temperature, and you basically keep the solid stuff. But in the process, you end up with coal tar, which is a horrible mess of organics, which are nasty and toxic. That's been done for 170 years here. So there will be stuff in the ground, and it's well known. This is major challenges to decontaminate. And for example, in Chesterfield, they have a site about a tenth of the size of this. They spend £40 million on cooking, I think it's 1 million tonnes of soil basically to get rid of all those things. Well, that may not be the best approach. Up in Newcastle, there's a place called St Anthony's Gasworks. Gasworks tended to also have the same sort of contamination. There they took 3 goes at getting rid of the contamination. In the end, what they've done is basically built a wall around the whole site. So they've dug down a long distance, they've put in an impermeable barrier, and they're monitoring that on a permanent basis. What they've done for this site is they've blown up a lot of things, which may not be a great idea if you've got lots of these chemicals around and they're also trapped on the ground. and they've taken off what was called the made ground. So if you've ever been around here where the blast furnace was, you'd see the slag over on the right-hand side where they dumped it from the furnaces up to quite recently. And you get these blocks of sort of fist-sized lumps of stuff, which is the slag. That's no good to build on, so they've taken 8 metres of that out, they've crushed it down and put it back on. That's not, to my mind, that's not, remediation. It's not cleaning up its redevelopment. And it might be the appropriate thing to do if you put the measures in place. But at some stage, that toxicity will come out. Groundwater ends up in the river. And then we've got the possibility of what are called dense non-aqueous phase liquids. And this is basically your normal oil, you can see. So not too black here, but if you think of your oil and vinegar, there's your oil floating on top, as you'd expect, because it's lighter than water. But dense non-aqueous liquids like this one down here, like the coal tar, will sink through the ground. So if you think about a sandy beach with some rocks underneath it, they'd sink through the sand, it would look perfectly all right. But if you dug down through the sand, you'd find them trapped in puddles, where the rocks are sort of keeping them trapped. And the same will be true underneath the south bank side. What worries me is when you look at how they are remediating this, you look at this, you do yourself a site conceptual map, and you say, I've got these different layers here, and I've got the red thing here is the non-aqueous phase liquids, and this is what they say is going to be the end state. We built some new buildings, it's all fine, there's a bit of flow this way, but basically our contamination is well away from the water course. That isn't going to be what happens. Over time, this is talking about decades, but years certainly. We're going to get these materials coming out. There will be other pockets that aren't concentrated, and they're going to basically end up flowing towards the river. And that's not going to be good news. And we're not monitoring for this. So even if I'm wrong, we should still be looking for it. The coal tar was there. Precautionary principle says you should be thinking. And this is the Chesterfield site I was talking about. Those are house bricks. So that is not material that's been tipped in. It's stuff that's come up through the ground because somewhere way over here there was a coal tar, spill or a coal tar reservoir that nobody bothered to clear up, and it just starts to come out. Now, obviously with the Tees, it's a deep river. We're not going to see that, but it's still going to be coming out there. So, that, and if we come back to the autumn 2021, there were some various statements said, I don't know if you saw it in the news, where people stood at the side of the river saying, we will not do, none of this land between me and the river will ever end up in the sea, which turned out not to be the case. But equally, they said we weren't doing anything in the river at the time, but they were blowing up things on the land. And what was going on is they were excavating just near to the quay. They were, down to 7.5 metres, I said. There was all the various deposits of materials that were left behind, because basically they just turned the lights off. SSI went bankrupt, last one out, turned the lights off. So there was a management company set up, which is South Tees, I forget the South Tees whatever limited, who were there basically keeping the site safe. They had responsibility for what is CODA, so control of major hazards to humans, major excellent hazards to humans there. But the stuff was just basically left there, and then they decided they'd blow things up, which isn't necessarily it's a quick way to get things down. This is 19th of December. It was the 19th of December it was listed. The following day it was unlisted, and what concerns me is that is a coke. That's a gas holder there. In the bottom of the gas holder, because of the way the gas had come from, there would have been huge amounts of coal tar. It's listed as hundreds of tons. So, you've blown up this thing right next to it. If something was a bit weak there, did it then crack and spill? And is that what ended up in the river? We didn't do the checking at the time. It wasn't done. So we don't know, because we're just not doing these measurements. I suppose it's a Tees work we saw at the end of this. The other story of this is a fantastic job. They've done a great job as Tees work. They need to get the site cleared quickly. They've done it really quickly. So they're great for that. It's going to bring jobs into the area. Not sure nature quite how to say on that. So dredging-wise, dredging, you start with a river. You have a channel in it. You want your boats where you're getting deeper all the time to go into it. So as material washes in, sand washes up from the sea in simple terms, silt washes down the river, you have to dig it out. So that's what we're doing here, is we're digging out and dredging out. The Tees have defined channels, and it's been going on for a long time. This is 1906. I mean, these were what are called bucket dredgers, so a bit like an escalator. Buckets on a thing, they go down, they dig up, and they drop it down again. Nowadays we have what's called a trailing suction hopper dredger. It's a bit like a vacuum cleaner. Vacuum cleaner here on the side, that gets lowered into the water and then it drags along the bottom. So we're going up and down the river dragging this up. And it'll dig some channels. Now you either go back and dig some other channels. The ones that are used in the Tees only have one suction pipe. And then you may either dig out the rest of it or you may get a plough in and just flatten it out. So if you think you want to go down to ½ a metre and you only dig out some of it to, let's say, a metre, you flatten it out to get your ½ metre. Now that's relevant because if you dig down deeper you may get into more contaminated. You're no longer in the clean material, you could be in the contaminated material. That gets pumped up and dumped inside what's called the hopper on the dredger, and that fills up. So here's your hopper filling up with the material. And then you take this out to that disposal site, you open the doors from the bottom, and the whole lot falls down. And then you start the process again, and off you go. So filling it, empty hopper, almost empty hopper, stuff gets pumped in here, it starts to settle out. There's a stage where you basically you haven't got much material in because it's not very concentrated and it's settling, but now you're overflowing. So these small particles I talked about before are going straight back in the river where you're dredging. And as you get fuller and fuller, more of that material goes back in the river. So what does it look like? This is the Hawk Ness, one of their current dredgers, and it's dredging just in the mouth between North Gare and South Gare. You can see it's going pretty slowly as the fishing boat feeding in. It'll be going below 3 knots, and it should be 1.5 knots, and just vacuuming along the bottom, keeping on sucking up. And this is the overflow I talked about. Now those are those small particles. They're not settling quickly. They're being carried a distance. They'll go down below the water so we can't see them, but they'll still be carried. Now, depending on what the tide is, here particularly, will depend. Actually, this is a particle I said that. And you can see down inside here, here's the hopper being filled up, and here's all the material coming away as it's dredging. So about 10%, over 10% of the material, and I can't get an exact figure for this one, I know this particular dredging is about 25%, ends up just dumped where you are. That's the small particles being resuspended by where you're dredging. And less than 90% ends up being taken out to sea and dumped from the disposal site. What does this look like? Well, this is basically one. If you watch, there's a time up in the top right, and those are the 2 dredgers on the 1st of March. They were going out, and they did about. So that's 1 day's dredging we've got there, and they've done about 14 kilometres of dredging. Now the dredgers don't go out every day, so the following day nothing much happened. They're sitting there, and I think a couple of days later you'll see them set out again. The point is that in one day they've done 14 kilometres and they've done about 6 visits to the tip. Now these have got about 1,500 cubic metres of volume inside them. Both of these, they're about that size. What happened in the UKD Orca, which is what happened at the stands, basically that's where the 25th of September comes in, and when we started to see things dying off. They were dredging that area right in the entrance to the river, but they were doing it in the same place for 10 days. Now UKD Orca is a trailing suction hopper dredger once again. It's about 50% larger than the current dredger and the ones they were using at the time. It was operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So whereas hopefully you got the impression the dredger came in, did a bit, went dump, did a bit, went dump, and it went back to bed. So it went and locked up in the river again at the end of the day. What you see for this one here, this is now what UKD Orca did. It was in the same place for 10 days, and you could run this for 10 days. But you get the compression. And that is right in where the literal flow was. So if my theory about small particles, big bad news is correct, then this was the perfect place to make sure those particles go all the way down the coast. And as you saw, the deaths happened all the way down the coast. This is it's not more than anecdotal, but it's not something that's considered. This is just accepted as standard dredging practice. Now, the way legislation works, it says what you're doing at the moment is okay because you've got a functioning ecosystem. So whatever the state of teas is now, that's okay. And so you can carry on doing what you're doing. Well, actually, things have been changing. This, I would say, is very different to what was done normally. Maybe what they're doing at the moment now is actually quite good because they do a little bit, they let it all wash away, they do a bit more. But this was, and I don't blame them. This is how you do it. Somebody comes in to do a job, their equipment's expensive, they come and do it all in one go. But that may have had a significant difference. Equally, those historic 1906 dredgers I showed you with a bucket had a very different way of dispersing materials. Most of the stuff fell out low down. By the time the bucket got to the surface, it was solids and it dumped into the thing. So it may not have been doing the same. And the thing with all this is people aren't measuring this. And as somebody who used to sell products by the ton, you have to measure things, because you have customers. And those customers could turn around and get stroppy with you. Batch 24/6, it used to be different to batch 24/7. Why? And you had to have an answer to explain to them. Anyway, sorry, you've seen enough of that. The only last bit that's a bit, I'm not quite sure how to do this bit, but I think it's important because what I talked about now is you don't measure it. Nobody's done measurings before and after. Even with the Orca, we don't have data. Nobody went out quickly and said, let's measure a bit. Nobody took a sample out of the dredge material and so on. This is the only time when we have a decently documented situation where dredge contamination happened. So from Builder South Bank Quay, where Ben Houchin stood on where the quay was going to be and said nothing will be dumped here out to sea, actually it was all dumped. What he meant was the bit of concrete work they were doing behind him, which was a tiny part of the whole job. So he wasn't lying, but it was possible to misinterpret. Am I allowed to get political here? But anyway, so anyway, there was one particular bit that was displayed. It wasn't allowed to be dumped at sea because it was so toxic. And they had to avoid any spillage in the river. So part of that license was you measure before, you measure after, and then you'll be fine. So prove you made it clean, you measure afterwards. So what happened was here, this is the bit that we're doing, this tiny bit here was actually supposed to be too bad to go to sea. All the rest of it, including a large portion of what had been the river here, was taken out to sea, apart from that made ground with the slag. So here's your bit here, and then they measured at these points around it. So relatively close, because, as I've talked about this resuspension, stuff's going to go a long way. But they measured very close, because it was going to be clean, wasn't it? They'd done a clean dredge. No, it wasn't. Don't worry about the numbers too much, but, basically high bad, low good. And, after they dredged, so they dredged in October, November it was unclean, they cleaned up in February and they got it back to roughly where it was. So that contamination was spread locally, if not around the whole river. Now this isn't to do with the crab die-off, but it's just pointing out that it is contamination will be spreading around the river. And with areas like this, we knew there was contamination there. But this isn't untypical for the teas. The teas have got a long history of this and industrial use. And the sort of things I was talking about, measurements, actually there are 1,500 days of dredging between each sample. In any sample once every 3 years, they take a sample on the bottom of the riverbed from the surface of it and where they're going to be dredging. And then they do that every 3 years, as long as it looks clean, then they can carry on. Now, it may well be, this is based on experience, you need to understand the river. I think the Tees is so heterogeneous that, there's been so many different bits of industry, even bits I'm aware of. But if you think of the steel industry, there were 150 furnaces there at one time, there were 30 companies or whatever. So each of those would have, there's a possibility in each in one little spot. They did something wrong, or they did something that was fine at the time, and it's left the history behind. So we're just not doing enough measurement of this. So to conclude, from the point of view where I'm going, we're trying to sample more sediment around as this particular small part of it. We keep on looking at sampling data. I mean, there's been a new application for the River Tees that's been approved. I needless to say, suggested they should do some significant modifications to the way in which they're dredging. I had very reasoned answers come back. I'm fairly convinced that the way in which the UK interprets an international convention is incorrect, and I think we need, there is a serious situation, we should be looking at that, but who knows. And then we're trying to publish where we can. When we pull things are going to have to be out, we're trying to publish, because this is something that comes back. The person who's done the work on the crabs was, the comment, oh, that work's not relevant because it doesn't need peer review. And when you haven't got the money for things, it's tricky sometimes. We're trying to increase engagement with agencies and governments. I mean, asking simple questions, we'll get answers, but we'll often get holding things. I had a set of data up to 2019, I'm told that data up to 24 is available, it will be available at a really good time. But, it's not there now. Tara Seal have very much hopes. They're planning to set up a temporary seal rehabilitation centre in Tartlepool, so we'll actually have someone with paddling pools effectively, but not much more than that, so we can take seals and give them a chance to, recover the pups. They won't be in a great state because they've got PCBs inside them. Hopefully we can have a better relationship with what DEFRA's doing to actually share data, because what Sue Wilson and Imogen Crawford, who are based in Tara Seal Research, they've been writing their stuff on a website. You can go and read all their results, what they did in 24 and now what they've done in 25. That's not the case with the Teesside University work, unfortunately. It should be public, but also this information. And I think you can see there, we're trying to basically say we need to do something now to help these seal pups. We can do something, and it's a shame it's not being done. There's some long-term things. I think you've got the idea. I'm not very keen on overflow, so we should really be looking at that and not letting dredges overflow. It makes the operation more time-consuming for them. They've got to go out to disposal site more often. But if we can't prove that's clean, we shouldn't be doing it. So I hope I've confused you about the crabs. It isn't as simple. I wish it was. I think the seals, it's unclear, but there are some really big smoking guns. We have some smoking guns for the seals. With the crabs, it's more complicated. There are so many smoking guns that it's difficult. The seals, and I think also with the seals, there's something. It's an ongoing situation. We should be doing something now. We should be investigating, and we should be doing things to make it better. The contamination bit, I've been assessed with. I've been staring at this data for 3 or 4 years now, and it's not easy. You have to get the data out, you have to program it, you have to, that isn't trivial to do. So I'm a bit obsessed with that. But the bottom line is we really do need to try and up our game. The system may be working, and that's what legislation says. But do we want a thing that's just rumbling along, vaguely working? We want to need a system to help nature and help us. So based in the end, we want a better environment for marine life, bird life, and humans. And in the process, stopping all the bits of dredging that don't need to be done in the wrong way as they are done at current. And back to acknowledgements which I've talked through before, and I hope I haven't been too long.
You didn't credit Richard.
Oh, sorry, look up. We have various people in the audience who've been involved in this. I mean, there are quite a lot of people here who have helped. I mean, that's why I put this up at the start. I might look up again now. It has been quite a team work. I mean, we spent 3 years working through everything, and I think it caused burnout to some extent for people. If you want to know more, this will all be up on. If you go to this website here, you'll find this talk and you'll find the further information.
Oh, thanks very much, Simon. It's been quite a meal to take.
Sorry, yeah.
No, it's fine. It's been very interesting. And, I know nothing about this, really. I mean, it may have made the national news, I don't know. Maybe it is.
Well, it's invisible, but I didn't know about it.
I think I look at newspapers, but I think this lot passed me by, honestly.
So So there's 2 million cubic metres of material taken out of the Tees.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like 30-storey tower blocks. Every year is taken out of the river.
Yeah.
You know, it's just huge. You don't know about it unless you're involved.
No.
Well, you know about the dredging being contaminated.
Yeah.
It was really bad, but something else must have happened, wasn't it? To cause the seal pups.
Well, that
At that time. It's obviously over history, it's been dredged forever.
yeah, that's the argument that says. Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, the way that, in essence, if anything happens, you should take a second look. So the fact that crabs have happened and seals don't, you should take a look. And that's what legislation says, and that's not happening. But you're right, I mean, but I would say things have happened. I mean, Tees Works was a big thing that happened in 2020. Well, now what we don't know, because it turns out the way the seals were being monitored wasn't very consistent. It was, you know, right, we've seen the seals, that's fine, we'll go away. It wasn't following them later on. So we don't know if the 2021 was really the seals starting then, or whether it had been going on beforehand in a big way. I mean, if you think what happened on the side of, well, there were a few things. I mean, there was a company called Vitalis that basically stopped its operations on the north side of the river, who used materials that could well have been, you know, contributory things. Did they do something wrong? There is the whole Tees Works, which is, you know, we know there are pipes in the ground that will have had materials in it. We can read, I mean, for example, in the States, there is one site where the EPA commended Exxon for doing an excellent job of clearing it up, because they took out what's called a pyridine sump, you know, from a coal tar works. Was there a pyridine sump at, you know, at Tees Works? I think, you know, that you're right. It's got to be, otherwise, it's this novel virus. I mean, the novel pathogen sorts the crowds out. There's a novel pathogen for the pups. It's not our fault. It's happened. But you know, we haven't ruled out all these other causes, and that's what is making sense.
When you start with
No, I mean, I stopped working for ICI, and somebody volunteered me to fly drones for an event to, you know, basically try and, you know, the crab death had happened. So there was a group called Reclaim RC, and they were having events, and they said, could I fly a drone? So I said, yeah. So I went along to fly my drone. Turned out there were lots of kids with drones who could fly them well, and I would, and also were slightly less law-abiding, so they got better pictures. So, you know, I basically, then I said, well, I better go and do this in chemistry, isn't it? Or it could be chemistry. So I went back and read a lot of the stuff. I got into all the planning applications for Tees Works, and I was amazed because Heseltine was there and his great plan for the area, and said this is, you know, really contaminated area. Only you know, a government can look after it and sort it out. I read the Tees Valley Combined Authority vision, and that was about heritage, leisure, and industry. The heritage and leisure seem to disappear in industry, but it said, you know, we've got to do a compulsory purchase order because it's so contaminated. Then I read the planning applications, and it said there is a risk here, no mitigation necessary. There is a risk here, no mitigation necessary. And those don't, you know, that got me worried. And as I said with that picture of the sort of clean site and the dirty site, I think they're, you know, drawing nice pretty pictures that aren't representative of what's really there because they're not looking for it.
So you left ITI and you joined what then?
Well, I mean, I didn't join anything. I'm doing this as I started doing this as an individual. So basically there was this, we had a sort of Tees pollution group, sort of interested people, a person called Sally Bunce, who got ex-police officer, who's now a police officer again. She got very much into going into this in a sort of forensic type way. I talked to her, so I was providing some chemical information. You know, things like that diagram I showed you, you know, I've talked to people who more understand more than me, and they're not, they say, you know, actually your diagram is better than the other one, but where's your evidence? And they say it for both of them, where's their evidence and where's mine? I haven't got it, because I can't go on the site and through another 100 metre borehole or whatever. So no, it's been it's a hobby.
So you can't actually say people you must do it. It's just your.
Well, I mean, I can write public representation. So if you go on the website, you'll find some of the ones I've written. I mean, there was Kate comes from Cornwall, so there was a Falmouth application. I was interested to see how clean Falmouth docks were compared to here, and sadly they're not. Falmouth docks are horrible because there was a Royal Fleet Auxiliary base there, and it looks like they've just been tipping stuff into the river, into the foul there. But the foul is a huge deep water port. So why are you dredging? Just have a floating structure. But that would cost more than, and that's what everything is driven by cost. And that's, but yeah, I mean, these agencies take me seriously. So yeah, I mean, I write a letter and I say who I am and, I get a response. But I can't hold their feet to the fire, no.
The bit of brick wall on road, they might take you seriously, but they don't take the investigation seriously. They wouldn't even turn up, none of them, to the what the council meeting.
No, that's a good point. So in Stan and I gave evidence to the multi-council meeting, and I mean, it was great. I had, councillors there who don't know huge amount of science, but were talking to me, and they were saying, right, how do you justify that? You said about this surface area. What is the relationship? I was talking them through it. I took it, I brought in my bit of sediment, shook it up, and showed them it's staying there. And they were really on board and got it. And they would ask the questions of their PD ports, for example. Well, this person's mentioned samples. Do you keep any? No. Sorry? Well, and I mean, to some extent, if you want, why would you keep a sample? Because it can only be bad news. If they reanalyse and it's bad, then... But their argument was, well, this isn't industry standard practice, and we cannot step outside industry standard practice.
So you're doing this for the teeth. What about the tine and the rest of the realm?
Well, they're all different. So I mean, the tine... The tine is doing some of what I like here. They're going to put in a space, so rather than take the stuff out to sea, partly because the fact the distance is longer, they're going to have a basically a space to clean it out. So they're going to dump stuff back to, I think it's called the Tine Restoration Facility, isn't it? And they're going to dump it there. Rotterdam, I mean, Stan, I know she read that, had a thing called the Slutter. So they have a huge great island where they take a lot of their most contaminated sediment and just pile it up there. Because over time, things will remediate to some extent, and you can keep going back and looking at it. This country, we put the most material out to sea, percent-wise. Other countries use a lot more remediation. The Dutch want to build dikes. Because if you put this stuff and bury it into a wall, it's there, but it's contained, and it's not necessarily. If you dump it out to sea, you are putting huge amounts of... so chemistry-wise, the anaerobic conditions it's sat in, you suck it up in a dredger, you put lots of oxygen around it, things will start to dissolve, but otherwise stay stuck there. So those are all potentially bad news.
The worrying thing for us from Arctic, when you have the slide up on the alpheos on there and the fish sands, it's the most popular birthing beach, sheltered, and the dredgers are going past all day long, 250, 300 yards away, that black suspended, most harmful pollutants, the sediment, is covering the beaches where the kids are breathing, and nobody is being interested at all.
I mean, you do have to, I think the surface sort of sunburn and things, there were certainly some days when people seemed to have rashes, and they probably were unlucky. That was the days when the current was going in that direction, and it was going off. The same with Hartlepool Beach. And that's what I'm amazed is that a lot of dredging things will say you can only dredge in ebb tide or whatever, so the water's going out. Seas, they can dredge any time. Spring tide, neap tide, tide going in, tide going out. Because normally they've always done it this way, therefore it's okay. And that isn't necessarily the case. When the river was full of cyanide, this didn't matter. You killed everything already. Now the river's clean, this is now part of what's coming in. So
we've had whistleblowers come to my door saying that they go out on the ship and drop 250-gallon drums of cyanide in the water and thought out of it. Whistleblowers, managers from the steelworks are always saying there was hundreds of drums of pyridine as part of the processing.
I just can't find the documentation
for the cooling towers. The dredger, lads who work on the dredger, if they had they only took the sample 3 centimetres deep, and they just dredged down, 7.5 metres. Yeah. And if they had a bad result, they won't take it from somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that could go openly not, but that could be the case. I mean, I have, in terms of, so I objected to one, I didn't object, I suggested some conditions for one piece of dredging, and my condition got incorporated, so they were going to have less of this overflow, only by a small amount, but a bit. But then some clever person worked, oh, well, hang on, if we're stopping the overflow, that means we can dredge all year round. So they've taken out the seasonal requirement, which they had for one piece of dredging, and they've replaced it with if the temperature is below 0 for 10 degrees, then you have to stop dredging until the temperature is above 0 for 10 degrees on average for 5 days. So, that's going to stop it virtually never, whereas the seasonal thing was doing. So I've done more harm than good, probably. Sorry. So if you're a bird lover, I haven't helped your birds to get fit in the winter, because that's what this stuff going in. Landing it out there will not be helping them to get anything that's in the benefit of the environment that they're thinking of.
On the overall investigations, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's absolutely loads of work gone into it, and loads of magnificent work, what you've done, reports, what you've done. Hopefully, we'll get some legislation changes and fight.
Yeah, we have to. It's building up to that critical point, and we've got it to the point where we can, and we're starting to see that. And I think, we are seeing also language changes. So what happens is, PD ports aren't bad guys. They have a job to do. They've got to keep the river working. They're using standard practices, and I think, as you were saying, they've always been dredging. I think somebody dumped something in the river, which they were just at the wrong time. The oil was working at the wrong time. If it had been there another time, 6 months later, 6 months earlier, it might have been okay. That's some speculation. But I think their procedures are unfortunately such that if anything happens, they will magnify it. And that's my business about, the dredging and
It's easy as unique, in fact, we've got a massive chemical industry. And they used to dump massive...
Yeah. I mean, from a hand up.
Very nice.
My ex-employers say, I mean, the steel, I think, the thing that's happened most recently is just this business with the steel works. That's a change that corresponds with 21. The chemical industry's been going on. It has clean, no question. The cyanide, the brilliant film, if you go on YouTube and search for pollution teas, you'll see a 1969 film. And they're talking about the cyanide levels being 3 times as bad in 69 as they were in 31, and kids getting rashes from being covered in the sand. And so it's no question it's better. It's just there's a difference between better and as good as it could be. I mean, nowhere near as good as it could be. It'd be nice to be moving in that direction, which we're not at the moment.
So the biggest explosion since the Second World War in this country happened just a couple of days before the die-offs began, when the Orca dredging come. All the grounds were made up of slag and stuff like that from the steelworks. The explosions were that bad that I've got the camera stuck on the bedroom window frame, filming it, and you can't see the footage because the house you think was earthquake. You know what I mean?
No. I mean, as you see, it's sort of boys' toys. I mean, that film from Teesworks, look what we've done. We've done it, it is, it is impressive. I mean, there's no question the blast furnace, it's a shame we didn't take it down slowly and recover it a bit better. But, they were trying to do a job quickly. Now, there's a whole tease, private eye 8 pages if you want to read about why that possibly happened. And certainly, it's not the best way to do things. It wasn't the only way. There are other ways you could have recovered that site.
The disappointing thing is the fishermen had a meeting with Big Lord Auction, Mr. B. Orlando, and we went to his offices and we put everything to it, but we, for that Freeport dredge, the environment risk assessments didn't mention at all the die-offs or anything. So we were saying, listen, that's a live document. He was going to dump that stuff on the 6 mile. It would kill the prawn grounds. It would kill the north kelp bed of Article, because the 3 mile only killed the south kelp beds with the tide works. And there was a company in Middlesbrough who would have took all of that spoil and cleaned it up and used it for repurposing foundations for roads. He says, sick of hearing about this company. I said, well, we spoke to them and they says that will take every little bit. He says, and he started getting angry and swearing, and he said that I've tried time and time again to get hold of this company. He says nobody ever answers the phone. So there was big arguments in mine, but when I went home, I phoned the company and they answered straight away. I says, Elton spoke to him now. So I phoned Elton's secretary and I says, can you tell him I'm nipped out tomorrow? But Forrest says, I dialed the number for him so he gets it right. They blocked us from going to any other meetings and they blocked all our emails, so we couldn't get in touch with them again.
I think on one of our other next steps is to try and get a dialogue going with BD boards, because I think BD boards are doing lots of environmental things. They have a new dredger in that's going to work on electric batteries and things like this. It'd be good to find a way that they can dredge that is less damaging and allows them to do their business. So we'll certainly reach out. There are some really good things in UK legislation. There's freedom of information, and also as PD Ports, as statutory harbour authority or a public body, anything environment related, I can ask them, and they do send me information. And it's and similarly with the public bodies. But there are still bits where, particularly around Teesworks and why. If Teesworks wasn't a private company, we could find out far more about what they were doing. Because as a council, they have risk requirements where they have to respond to things. As a private company, commercial interests, they don't have to. So, it's difficult. We set up a meeting with the Redcar and Cleveland planners, with their chemical people, and basically we were asked not to speak to them because their managers came instead, because they felt it was too pressurising for them. But these are serious decisions being made, and we were only going to ask some technical questions. We weren't going to go and wrangle them. We were going to say, this document here, we don't understand why this bit said serious concern, and the plan came in and said nothing needed doing, and you said that's okay. Can you explain to me why that's the case? I hope they could. They could have probably said to me, what you don't understand is X, Y, and Z, and that would be really helpful. But basically, it had become so political by that stage that we weren't able to have that meeting.
The investigation was being undertaken. The science of it was. There's a film going to be coming out because we've been following all of us, haven't for years, filming. But just because you're a member of the North East Fishing Collective, or you're a scientist undertaking investigations on behalf of the North East Fishing Collective, shouldn't receive death threats. Your family shouldn't receive death threats, but that has happened. So
I'm glad you all agreed to come to this political meeting. It's a reality. If we want to get things, we want an environment, and I think, this government particularly said it was going to do things to make things better, and we need to hold them to it. And it's at a practical level. And I spoke to the multi-council party, and I was impressed by these councillors. They didn't have to be on this committee. They didn't have to be doing it. And PD Ports turned up, NIFGA to the North East Shore Fishing Collective turned up, Stan turned up, I turned up, various other people did to give them evidence, our evidence, this is what I've analysed, it's not my opinion, this is my analysis, this is what's gone out of it, there may be data I'm missing. But they asked the Marine Management Organisation, they asked the Environment Agency to come and talk to them, and none of them did. And it's just really disappointing we don't get that.
What do you have more done if you were employed?
The trouble is, there is a catch-22, because the people I talk to on this, I talk to a lot of people who understand Teesworks better than I do, and they're very keen to talk, and then they say, well, hang on, before I put something in writing, I need to go and check. And it turns out they are all, through their companies, they have an existing contractual relationship with either Teesworks or its contractors. So none of them are in a position. So I probably couldn't, because I would, and to some extent things like Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace have bigger fish to fry. And that's what, the RSPB has been quite good at making noises. And there is a thing going on in Sussex at the moment that I need to understand better, where they're trying to take the Marine Management Organisation to court for what they've done in terms of license. And maybe we can help them, or we can possibly learn what they're doing. But it's tricky. The other, in the next phase, legally, is the Office of Environmental Protection. So the last government put in this thing called the Office of Environmental Protection. They have a fairly narrow remit, but if this fits into it, they're a very easy way to get somebody to seriously look into this. The Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee had a committee meeting where they looked at this. And once again, they took audience and evidence and people turned up. It's a while ago, it's time for another one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
It didn't have any answers, but it did get the thing out, and it did have a conversation between both sides of it.
An article council at the Joint Council Investigations nothing political about this issue.
No, no.
Everybody wanted things to
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, you know, North Yorkshire Council being there, very conservative council. Sorry, Jeff.
Obviously, you haven't reached the Environment Agency.
No, not heavily. They're involved. I mean, less so with this. I mean, with this, if I wanted, well, we are talking about the Environment Agency, tips and things. There are a lot of landfills made into here. We've talked to them about that. We've talked to them about material. So, and I think this is probably a spill again. There were 170,000 tonnes supposed to have come out of that hole in the ground, the one exclusion zone. There are only 120,000 tonnes on land. So where did those other 50,000 tonnes go? And we haven't got a proper answer. I mean, you know, I think probably they got spilled. That was 50,000. And that's what, I mean, what I didn't say for the UKD Orca, in the official documentation, they dredged 150,000 tonnes, and they think conservatively, I don't know if it's bigger or small, there were 50,000 tonnes that got resuspended. So, you know, that is not a small amount of stuff, you know. 10 days, that's, you know, 50 billion, that's 5,000 tonnes a day, basically was ending up slowing down the coast. And that's not untypical, because that's the way these dredges work. They fill up the top, they let themselves overflow, they've got a bit of stuff being stirred up the bottom. And you're moving so many huge amounts of material that, you know, even 5% loss or 50 or 25% loss is big amounts of material. But the sea's big, and the argument is the sea's big, so it's not a problem. But, you know, it doesn't spread everywhere.
Isn't there an exceeding simplification? But what action did the crabs down?
It wasn't just the crabs, so before that it was crabs, it was everything.
Yeah.
Even worms, even the seaweed. They fell on the back and the legs were just twitching until they died. They couldn't get upright. The worms, cockles, I've got videos. If you went on that website, there's 100 and odd instances of the die-offs over a 3-year period, isn't it? 3.5 year period.
So the crab deaths looked like they were dying of basically central nervous failure. Something was attacking the nervous system, and that was failing. But we don't, you know.
You haven't seen the news, nobody's doing post-mortem, it's just why
It's very difficult with crabs. Because I mean, I haven't, but people have. So, I mean, Gary Caldwell up at Newcastle, John Bothwell, and people like this at Durham have looked into this. You know, retrospectively, I mean, what Gary did is he did these pyridine experiments and got very similar behaviour. So he had these crabs were doing the twitching, and doing everything else, and he knew then it was the pyridine that had dealt with them. But you know, just because that, and it's not, it's a similar behaviour that there were certain parrots. I mean, CFAS. So the government has this. Our agency systems are very complicated. So there's a thing called the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science, which is down in Lowestoft now. And they're basically world experts on fish diseases, anything marine diseases. So the first thing they did was look at, you know, they knew that, you know, people like Stan had told them, this is how the crabs are dying. So they looked at the crocuses they got and saw if they could find these pathogens. They basically couldn't. So they ruled out, and they couldn't find any other biomarkers of the big other pathogens. So back in 2021, when they had fresh samples, they ruled that out. You know, they didn't say exactly what, you know, it wasn't, you know, we could find so much arsenic inside them. Pyridine, and that's why pyridine was jumped on, because they did say some of these crabs had very high levels of pyridine. Retrospectively, that's been pulled back on, but at the time, and you know, possibly that didn't help once again. Perhaps people would have tried harder at the time.
It's been pulled back on by them. I had a phone call from one of the ladies at CFAS, and we were having a bit of argy-bargy, and I got on, she did slip. She says, well, we probed that there wasn't a pathogen in 2022.
Yeah.
So I said, hold on a minute. I was with my wife and the in-laws. I said, you're telling me that you probed that there wasn't a pathogen in 2022? But the committee, just before we go for our judicial review, just come out and had another meeting and says, it's probably a pathogen, unknown pathogen. Why didn't you tell them that you'd already probed that it wasn't one? And she says, they didn't ask us.
So I mean, it's a reasonable, but we don't know exactly. And equally with even with the seals, where the bodies, we can see what's wrong with them, and we can see what they died of. They died not, to eat, not thriving. But we can't see exactly what's causing them to be in that state. We know from evidence elsewhere that PCBs definitely cause this sort of effect. So the reasonable thing is to say it's the PCBs. With the crabs, I mean, I haven't gone through, and I could have given you if you want another whole talk on contaminants. I mean, the range of chemicals there. I mean, so Gary Caldwell looked at purely the pyridine, because that's what was flagged up. But what he's also done is machine learning type approaches, where you look at all the composition of chemicals and you look for interactions between them. Because if I've already got some arsenic in me and you then give me some pyridine, it's not going to help me. So, that's an interaction. So it may well be that any one of these chemicals is below a level where it's only can kill the species, but, combination. And, the heavy metals there are these polyaromatic hydrocarbons, so, really carcinogenic, nasty things. The polychlorinated biphenyls, PDDs, polybrominated materials that we're wanting in fire type things. Organochlorines, and then we also have things like people let their dogs swim in the sea just after they put flea cream on, and that is incredibly toxic in the environment. So we are stressing this environment. But yeah, I'm equally frustrated in that way. I mean, and having said that, we also got one of the chief scientists of the Environment Agency in to talk to us, because he was interested in this. So he phoned up Gary and said, look, I'm in Newcastle, I want to chat to you. And he was saying, well, what's the level of cyanide in the river that week? And we looked at him straight, we don't know. Of course you know, it's in there. And of course they now only measure it once a month. And what happens is a boat comes up the river, up the coast. I mean, you may know this, yeah. So I didn't know any of this. So Lowestoft, there's a boat, it leaves Lowestoft on a Monday or whatever, and it sails up the east coast. So if it's Wednesday and you're in Hull, don't spill anything there, because they'll be in there. I mean, this is really cynical. I'm sure people don't work this way, but it's one measurement. So when they're talking about water quality, my idea of this as a chemist, we used to measure things continuously. I was always putting things on chemical plant, did continuous measurements. You don't do that. They take one sample, a month quite often. I mean, for drinking water, it's obviously sampled more often, but water bodies, it's normally, 1 a month, yeah, so if you're lucky.
Yeah, just, it looks like you've got lots of work into this talk. Have you given this talk lots of places, or just the first?
I gave something similar back in February, but I've changed this as a moving story. I mean, we could give it lots of places. I mean, I've given a similar talk to this to the multi-council party. It's available on the website there if you want to listen to it from me. I mean, if it was a full, what we're drastically missing, if anybody has any funding, we could really do with a project manager to tie all these different bits together, because I'm doing my own bit. And I mean, as I say, I get a new set of data from CFAS or something. I've got to work out how I read that data, how I plot it out so it looks sensible for anything else. All these things take non-zero time. And actually, I enjoy going with the data, trying to pull things out of it. And I'm a bit of a not great finisher, so my current thing is I'm following the, exactly, I think they are misreading the OSPA regulations. So the OSPA, just going to real deep, check this up for 2 seconds. There are 2 graphs, there are 2 tables. One says area and one says volume. The volume one follows the area one. If I use the volume one, I have to do very few samples. If I use the area one, I have to do lots of samples. The UK ignores the area table and it only uses the volume table. Now hang on, that table comes first, this one comes second. Surely it's that, the point of this second table is if I've got this bit here and I'm taking 1 million tonnes out of a cubic meter, out of a square metre, according to the area table, I need to do 1 sample. Obviously that's stupid. So the volume table is there, that if you're taking 1 million tonnes from a small area, you have to do more samples. It's not there to say if you're taking 1 million tonnes from the whole of the river Tees, you only have to do 1 sample. So it's that sort of thing that just seems wrong. And I'm reading this as a naive scientist. I reflect this back to somebody who previously worked for NAF. And his featured comment was to send me back a thing correcting the OSPA document to say the OSPA document has got these 2 tables in the wrong place. They should have reversed them. And you go, no. But, you know, I mean, when I reflected that back to him, he went, yeah, you know, because he's had it drummed into him, that's how it's supposed to be interpreted. And, you know, that's what he's slightly. So, yeah, it's, so that's my current intellectual challenge, is trying to get one up on, trying to get one up on the MMO. But yeah, if anybody else wants, if you have people who'd like to hear, I'm very happy to give the talk again. You know, I don't know how long I've been this evening. It's supposed to be, I think I've only gone to 35 minutes, and I've been an hour and a
Half questions.
Sorry about that.
Make it a weekend drone show anyway.
Any other opinion, any other thoughts of this knowledge from having been, parts of this river? What we're missing is baselines. The pictures of the crowds. We didn't have tons of people going on beaches every day taking pictures until crowd time. So we don't know what a good beach looks like. Well, we know what a really good one looks like, but we don't know what happened in the meantime. This data just isn't being collected. So lots of citizen science there, which is doing really great too.
Simon, thank you very much.
Well, I think thank you very much.